Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I can see people have just started coming in on the attendees list, but I'll just give it a few minutes before I kind of start making some introductions and we make a start, if that's okay. Perfect. We seem to get people filtering in now, which is good. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, we seem to be getting plenty of people in now, so that's fantastic. So, yeah, like I say, good evening, everyone, and kind of thanks for joining us for this webinar hosted by the Register of Sheep Advisors. My name's Greg Hopkinson, and I work at Basis, who have worked in collaboration with the National Sheep Association to set up RoSA, and we're just getting towards the end of our first membership year. So, yeah, it's great to be kind of with you all here this evening. I'm quite new to the sheep sector and the sheep industry, so I might be a bit of a new face to everyone, but yeah, really kind of enjoying being part of this journey with RoSA. So the topic of our webinar today is all about diversification and kind of, is it time to diversify, especially looking at kind of farmers. And we've got I'll move on. And I just wanted to, before I introduce other people who are speaking today, just run through the software we're using here. So this is the webinar software that we use at Basis, and it's called Webinar Jam. It's pretty easy to use, but it might be slightly different to the one we've used previously when NSA have hosted some of these webinars. Firstly, can I ask, for all those RoSA members, if you'd like to claim your CPD points for attending the webinar today, there's a little chat function, and if you could just type your 200 number, so your RoSA account number into there, that'd be fantastic. Then we can download that after the session and you'll get your points awarded straight after. And hopefully next to that chat, if you click on that chat button, there's also a section that says Q&A only. So that's where you can type in any questions you've got as we go through the webinar today. So yeah, just type them in as they come into your head. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a session on questions at the end. So we'll get all the speakers back onto the back on the screen. I can see someone's put the 200 number in, so that's obviously working and you can all hear me. And we'll have a session at the end where we kind of get everyone to answer the questions rather than doing it after each speaker. Then the final thing I'm going to ask people to do is we can also do a few polls. So I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then before I pass over to them, I've got a few questions to ask so we can just set the scene and see where we all are on kind of diversification and how much experience we've got with it, and kind of take it from there. So we've got 3 speakers on the webinar this evening. We've got business consultants, and he's going to give a real introduction into diversification opportunities and how it works on farms and clients that he's got. We've then got Charles Trotman from CLA, who's going to look a bit more on the economics of it, and as my money bag shows there, hopefully fill that big bag of money up. And then finally, we've got Elsa, who's one of the NSA's next generation ambassadors. And that's a picture. I hope she doesn't mind. I've stolen it from the website of her farm shop. And so that's some first-hand experience on a farm that's kind of successfully done some diversification. It'd be great to hear kind of Elsa's story. But before I pass over to Alex, like I say, I'm just going to run 2 polls, if that's all right. So the first one is hopefully just going up now. So hopefully you can all see that. And obviously, I'm guessing we might have a mix of farmers and advisors and people who work as advisors and farmers. So I thought I'd put it here. But do you work on or with farmers who have successfully diversified? So at the minute, it says 100% and no. So I'm sure we've got some. There we go. It's kind of filtering through now. So let's just see where this kind of settles down, and then we can see where we are. Okay, so we've got about 2/3 who have worked on farms that have diversified, or diversification has gone well, and then we've got another 1/3 of people who haven't been involved in it so much. So that's quite a good mix, I think, for this webinar, which will be good. Some people with some experience and some without. And then my second one is this one, so I'll just get this one loaded up. And this is a slightly more negative way of putting it, but it's, have you ever worked on a farm or kind of similar, like I said before, your farm or a farming business where there's been an unsuccessful diversification project? So where someone's tried to do something and it's not kind of had the benefit. Okay. So we seem to be, we're almost exactly the same, actually. It just changed at the last minute. So 60% have been on a farm where they've not had any kind of unsuccessful projects, but then there are kind of, there's obviously has been some unsuccessful diversification projects out there as well. So that's really interesting. And I'm really pleased to say I can pass over to Alex now. I'm just going to load his slides up, and we can then kind of, Alex is going to give us a bit of an introduction to the different diversification opportunities that are out there.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Alex is a little bit quiet, so you might just need to turn your speakers up, everyone. But he says he's going to do his best to lean in and shout nice and loudly as we go through the presentation.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. So my name's obviously Alex. I'm one of the founding partners of Dudley Peverill Associates. My background was initially farm consultancy and agronomy after graduating from Harper Adams. I started Dudley Peverill with my business partner, Anthony, in February 2021 to try and make an impact within the advisory industry due to sort of seeing the changing trajectory of which agriculture in the UK is taking. We sort of saw there was a gap in skills and time resources within the farming sector, creating a barrier to diversification on many farms. So ultimately, we're attempting to transition farmers from price takers to price setters. So yeah, I'm here to talk to you today about farm diversification, why it's becoming increasingly important, and sort of how to go about it in a way that ensures it's successful. So what is farm diversification? Well, we define it as when a farm branches out from its core agricultural operation to add new enterprises and income streams. These enterprises can be intertwined, sort of semi-agricultural, or completely unrelated, such as events, glamping, or commercial lets enterprises. We found that diversifications are more often successful when they complement existing enterprises, or at least they're non-competing for resources. So yeah, you can see DEFRA's definition is work of an entrepreneurial nature on or off farm, but utilizes farm resources. And interestingly, by this definition, only 66% of farms in England were recorded as diversified in 2021. So there's big leaps to be made there. Next slide, please. Okay, cool. So why diversify your farm? It goes without saying, the reduction of basic payment scheme until a total loss in 2027 is a main driver behind looking towards other income sources. We do have upcoming payment schemes looking to replace this, but currently there's lack of clarity regarding the ELMS programme and therefore sort of unquantifiable subsidy income, although we are getting more information about that as time moves on. Brexit and new trade agreements. So probably most poignant to you lot is the New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which was signed on the 28th of February this year. It's set to fundamentally eliminate tariffs on all goods. New Zealand producers experience about 25% lower cost base than UK land producers. So, you know, they're fairly competitive there. We've also got input volatility. So we all know ammonia fertilizer costs have gone up in excess of 200% since September 2020. Fuel's gone seemingly mad, with red diesel topping out at £1.30 and white around £1.80 a litre. Feed costs have been £65 since September 2020, and that's likely to sustain in the near future. Unpredictable weather conditions. What do I mean by this? Well, climate change, if you believe it, appears to be bringing about more volatile weather conditions and unpredictable seasons, particularly across the last couple of years. I think we can all say that we've had periods of extreme waterlogging and drought, which have had a massive effect on input. With regards to demographics, we've got the obvious rise of veganism, and then going back to climate change, the Climate Change Committee are now calling for a 20% reduction in red meat and dairy consumption by 2050, I think it is. So yeah, no, that's not great for the red meat industry. And obviously then we've got the war in Ukraine, which isn't helping things either. Right. So now if we look at the results from DEFRA's Farm Business Survey of 2021, we can gain an insight into farm business income across all the various farm types you can see there. Pay particular attention to the light green because that's agricultural income. So the graph here shows that on average, farming enterprises alone are a loss-making exercise for grazing, livestock and mixed farms in England, unfortunately. So without BPS, agri-environmental schemes or diversified enterprises, these farms are targeted as potentially most at risk. The little black dot you can see there shows the effect of a negative net margin on a livestock-based farm's total business income. So if we drill down further into the DEFRA 2021 survey, we can see distribution of farms according to the proportion of their farm business income that comes from diversification. The data set from this graph included only farms that were diversified, so it's pretty fair. So when this data was analysed further and grouped, it could be concluded that 38% of farms received a quarter of their total farm business income from diversified activities. And 23% of farms receive more than half of their total farm business income from diversified activities. So that really shows the scope for potential income that can be had. However, looking into the graph above, you can sort of see that 4% of farms actually lost money through their diversified enterprises, which I think is an encouraging statistic when you compare it to how many farms agricultural enterprises generally have a negative net margin. And also the fact that over 10% of diversified farms in the sample increased their income by over 100%, as can be seen on the graph. So that's pretty good going. Perhaps more optimistically, what are the benefits? So obviously the first one is income. So you've got potential for increased income and better cash flow to the farming business, which is always a problem. Emphasized recently by rising input costs. You have these massive checks for fertilizer or feed to pay. Risk mitigation. Your farming business will become hopefully less reliant on one source of income, which in turn will reduce pressure on farms' agricultural performance, something which is variable and never promised. Better utilization of assets. So the potential of generating an income from disused or underutilized resources, such as building or marginal land. Do you have areas which are less productive or buildings which are redundant that you could use? Perhaps one that's most overlooked. We find that diversification can offer financial support and opportunity for additional farming family members and younger generations. We often see conflict between the generation, and diversification could be a good way of resolving this conflict by giving the younger generation responsibility and input into the business without the older generation having to relinquish total control of the business. So it's really useful there. And perhaps also overlooked is if you've ever had an interest outside of production agriculture, which in this instance would be sheep production, it's a chance to explore other areas of interest or even build on interests such as sheep production by adding value to what you produce, for example. So what are the difficulties? Firstly, can your farming business support itself? What do I mean by this? If the farming enterprise isn't washing its own face, is it performing at its optimum? If not, can you pick low-hanging fruit and first improve that to improve your overall business? Can your production systems be improved? And are there opportunities that you haven't yet explored, like countryside stewardship or new schemes and initiatives? Moving on from this, any new enterprises that you introduce mustn't be detrimental to your existing farming enterprise. So by this, I mean, it shouldn't interfere logistically. It goes without saying you shouldn't be mixing tractors and the public, or specifically children, because it's not only immensely frustrating, but also a health and safety risk. It also shouldn't put the existing business at risk in terms of limiting access to labour, resources and finance. So on the financial note, projects can be hard to fund depending on the situation. So can you start with a lower expenditure project, investing more once the enterprise proves successful? If we use glamping as an example, investing in a low-cost bell tent type unit to test the market and feasibility prior to investing in expensive units is a good way of doing that. Time constraints, as I'm sure you're all aware, farming is an extremely busy business, particularly within the peak seasons. So during, say, lambing, when you barely have time to eat and sleep, you'll be less available to both run and start a diversification project. So while setting it up and in its operation, I mean. So labour access and maintaining that impetus throughout the project development is key. Market demand. We often see mistakes here. It's really easy for people to rush in and spend loads of money on a project because they think it's a good idea. But if they haven't actually identified demand for the product or service, the enterprise probably won't do as well or might even fail, and money's been invested by that point. So it's important to have the entrepreneur's mentality of sort of sell it first before investing, which is contrary to how agricultural businesses usually sell, being price takers. So yeah, new skill sets and gaps in knowledge. The introduction of new enterprises on farms, which may be more consumer focused, brings with it a requirement for a host of new skills, which aren't usually necessary in typical farming businesses. So, for example, you'll likely need to focus a lot on branding, marketing, and sales, something which you might not really have a lot of expertise in at the moment. However, it is important to realise that everything can be learned. There's a lot of help available online and through advisors. So. Right. So how do you go about diversifying a farm? On this slide, you'll see our sort of 5-step roadmap that we use to help guide clients through development of new farm enterprises. It's also how we go about actually servicing them. We find it really helps compartmentalize stages of the project for clients, which sort of A, makes discussing the project a lot more palatable, and B, it gives us points to review our service with them, so we can exit at any point should they want to carry on their own. So if we delve into each stage. So firstly, we've got analysis of resources. So we'll start off by analysing the existing business to get a feel of how it's performing and the immediate confines it places upon you. At this stage, it's important to lay out how your venture must work and explore opportunities with those in mind. What I mean by this is, are you a more private or busy individual who doesn't necessarily want to add an additional business to run, or would you prefer a rent-taking business? We refer to these rent-taking businesses as property investments, where, for example, you might want to develop an underutilized building into commercial let, which will provide rental income, and you won't necessarily need to run it as such, other than just being a landlord and collecting rent. We've also got, we describe them as enterprise projects. So they're the ones that you actually have to run. So, a farm shop where you'll have to be actively involved in the operation. Going on from that, we've got to consider the resources you have available, such as capital, assets like land and buildings. At the same time, it is vital to sort of explore the external environment, such as local amenities, your site access, competition, and transport links. Most importantly, though, remember that the biggest resource to your business is actually yourself. And off the back of what I said about your involvement levels, make sure that the ideas and strategies that you consider encompass the aspirations of yourself and others that are involved. That's really important because you need to be creating something that's going to enhance your business, not be a drain on you and it. So to summarize, sort of think of this stage as sort of idea generation of what might be possible. And if I was to summarize what's most important, I'd say, firstly, your aspirations and goals and objectives. So things like the available time you have to operate and the involvement you wish to have. Finances available, your investment budget, access to borrowing and target return on investment. Your surrounding market, which includes demand, obviously, and competitors. We always look into the local authorities' local development plans to get a feel as to what developments they're after, which can be really helpful if your enterprise needs planning. And then, of course, access to your proposed site. So that's obviously really important if your enterprise is high footfall. So then if we go on to the next stage, you've got the detailed feasibility study. So once opportunities and ideas have been developed, it becomes necessary to begin the business planning type bit. Typically, like most business plans, this usually includes detailed budgeting, routes to market, funding and accessing finance, but also identifying any risks and assumptions within the enterprise. Diversification projects are usually pretty bespoke to the farm, as all farms are different. So you can't model the sort of budget that accurately at all times. So we sort of call these enterprises innovative business projects, and we use a simple but effective method of budgeting called reverse costing. So I'll give you a brief overview of what that is. Firstly, set your acceptable rate of return. So let's say 10% is your minimum return that you're going to be happy with. Next is the easy bit. You sort of need to work out how much you need to invest. You can do that through getting quotes and prices. So that will be how much it costs to set the enterprise up. Then you need to sort of determine your operating costs. That can be slightly more difficult, but again, through a bit of research, you can find that out. When you know how much your project will cost to set up and run, you then need to sort of work out how much money you can realistically make. So this might be pounds per square foot, pounds per admission, or so on, multiplied by sort of occupation rates or products sold. It's a matter of then using all these figures that you have to sort of see if the return rate is above your minimal return rate. And if it's not, is it realistic? Can you extract costs? And as again, going back to assumptions, we also use assumptions registers, which basically any assumptions you make through the budgeting or the project in itself is listed here, and you can return to that and see if they're still valid throughout the sort of enterprise growth. A good example of a logical assumption is occupancy rates for glamping enterprises or quantities of products sold, which will obviously have a significant impact on the feasibility of a project. So next we have planning and regulation. So once you've deciphered that the enterprise has wings and is feasible, you'll need to tackle any relevant planning, regulation or licensing that you might require. This could be, for example, Class R planning, prior notification if you're converting a building. This stage can be the most time consuming, with long wait times often dictated by local authorities or other governing bodies. It's important to maintain impetus and hold third parties accountable. Otherwise, you can really get long delays. We've had an experience where on a relative farm business, we had a distillery license in principle that took 6 months before it was granted after much appealing. So yeah, you can really lose time here. It's at the end of this stage, though, that you should really have everything you need to make a final decision and either proceed with the works, alter the project to make it feasible, or abandon it. It may well end up that your project is unfeasible, but perhaps you can start smaller or make changes to affect the initial risk profile and feasibility. It's worth saying, don't be scared to walk away at this stage either. It's better to have invested time and money to determine whether something is viable or not, rather than just investing a lot of money in it to find out when it's too late. So yeah. Next we go on to delivery. So this is where it gets exciting. Project delivery stage. You'll likely begin building works, undertake development of websites, branding, and get systems in place. You might also look for joint venture partners or recruitment of staff. Similarly to the planning and regulation stage, the delivery of a project can be protracted and time consuming. We often see the two stages together as a sticking point for many due to busy seasonal farming commitments. As such, make sure you've got someone to take responsibility of the project delivery. If you haven't got the time yourself, depending on the project, this is where unexpected costs may arise. So you'll need to make decisions and changes as well as guide the professionals and contractors involved. So if you haven't got the time yourself, appoint someone who does. With regards to branding and marketing, it's really important that you spend time establishing your brand. It's worth setting what your brand objective is, sort of like a mission and vision. Around that, you can really build up a brand personality and culture, something which is increasingly important in today's sort of digital age, and it drastically improves consumer engagement. Whilst branding, naturally, you'll probably begin IT-based developments alongside the physical developments. Branding and marketing are vital to the success of a business, so resource investment is well placed there. If you haven't already done so by this point, I'd recommend looking into URL availabilities for your website, getting that made and populated, ready for launch, setting up social media channels, and it's also worthwhile noting that social media is probably the best form of digital marketing going, so it's very cost effective. make sure that whilst you're carrying out these developments of your website and socials, that your brand remains consistent. Similarly, when you're marketing after launch, the brand's personality needs to shine through to present what makes what you're offering unique. So, final stage, project launch, the grand finale, which marks the beginning of trading for your diversification enterprise, the point at which obviously ongoing performance and systems have to be managed so that the enterprise can continue to grow, hopefully. You should monitor the performance and enterprise through KPIs and sort of things like that, similarly to how you would a farming enterprise. Make changes where necessary to adapt to changes and different markets. As the business hopefully begins to grow, you'll likely find that resource requirements probably change with it. This might bring with it, say, the need to dedicate more time and labor. So early planning for growth and a growth strategy is always advisable. Nearly all of our clients are happy to handle the ongoing performance and management of their diversification projects, but we do offer ongoing support. But it is great to see businesses that you've helped set up grow and really make a difference to the farm. So, so I'll give you some examples of projects we're involved with.
Just a few more minutes, if that's all right, Alex.
Yeah, that's fine. So instead of reeling off examples of diversification options to you, I thought I'd list a few of the various projects that we're currently involved with. Firstly, so with regards to property investments, at the top left, you can see that we're undertaking a large listed agricultural barn to office conversion. That's a particularly complex project. It's a high capital conversion project, and it's made more difficult by sort of planning constraints due to the heritage wooden beams. We're just finalising the feasibility of that before sending it off to contractors. Next one down, we've recently finished a Class R project of an old Crendon barn, something that's on a lot of farms, to a commercial storage unit. It fitted well into the farm because the farmer didn't really want to have any involvement. He just wanted a rent-taking sort of enterprise. I think it cost around 180 grand and it returns about 30 grand a year. So that's a really good ROI for him. Below that, we also carried out a larger agricultural to residential project whereby part of it was sold off to release capital and part of it was retained and rented, again, because the farmer really didn't have any time or desire to run an enterprise. On the other side, we've got enterprise investments. I shouldn't have favourite projects, but my favourite one is the one at the top. We're involved with the farm distillery. We're converting the grain store and an old calf shed into a small sort of distillery area and events. The orchard that's going to supply this is also being planted. Although largely we're at the back end of feasibility testing, we're very involved in helping them develop a brand and marketing strategy as well. They'll be producing eau de vie, I think it is, which is a form of schnapps, something a little different. We're also doing glamping enterprises. That particular one there is in Wales, and also dog training, which are great because they don't really need a great deal of investment in infrastructure, and they can be started from a relatively low cost base. So they're good to look at if you've got underutilized grassland. So if you're stuck for ideas, go to our website. We've got a free web app tool. It's a short interactive survey which takes no longer than 5 minutes. Using the answers you provide based on personality, your business and investment attitudes, your preferences towards privacy and engagement, and your site, it will sort of give you a report like the one above, which I've enlarged part of it for clarity, as to what sort of enterprise might suit you and your farm. It obviously doesn't give you an outright answer, but it does help prompt thought, and it certainly helps with all the considerations that it provides you. Please, do feel free to use it. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. That was a really good introduction. And my internet does keep dropping out slightly, but I hope it didn't disrupt anyone else and you kind of kept going perfectly there. So thanks very much. Like I said, if you've got any questions, then please put them into the Q&A and we'll have them all at the end. But I'm going to pass over to Charles now from the CLA, and he's going to give their perspective on diversification, if that's okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Alex, for that. It was an extremely useful background. So what I'm going to do is look at a number of issues that tend to emerge when we discuss diversification, look at what's happened in the past and how we can actually learn from this, and then identify the opportunities that arise. And it's important as we move into, in a sense, you could say, a different phase. So next slide, please. So why diversify? I think it's important to firstly understand what is diversification. Alex has already given you the DEFRA definition, but in the context of rural, we'd say that diversification is essentially the creation of another business that both should be financially and structurally able to stand alone from the original primary business, which would normally in this instance be the farm, and a secondary or subsidiary business that could be, for example, tourism, or it could be recreation, could be a farm shop. But what it does, it provides an income stream. So we're talking about here 2 or more income streams that should be accounted for separately. But with the majority of agricultural businesses, certainly at the moment, they tend to be asset rich and cash poor. And of course, this has severe or significant implications for being able to generate sufficient capital to be able to actually start the diversification project in the first place. And it's also important to stress that rural diversification isn't just about tourism, although that is seen by many as the main activity. As I said, it could be creating the farm shop, it could be warehouse capacity within a bespoke business park, or actually creating a digital network. But I think the important point here to understand is that there are no hard and fast rules, and it very much depends on the idea, on the original idea that you have and the business plan. Really, what is the objective of the diversification project, and then how can that actually be achieved in the long run? Next slide, please. So if we look at what's happening in the moment policy-wise, and we're looking at changing policy options, and we know everybody here knows that we're talking about agricultural policy transition. It's important to, I think, stress that UK agricultural policy has always been targeted towards the removal of subsidy and more towards a more market-dominated sector. But this has really only been possible since the UK exited the European Union formally last year. And what it means is that this is the most significant shift in policy direction, certainly since the Second World War. So it's a move from it's a move away from market support and toward a move towards the delivery of environmental goods. And this shift has significant and obvious implications for diversification. If it's the case that farmers and land managers are unable to make a margin through primary agriculture, there has to be an incentive towards using the available assets to a new venture. Remember, I said many farmers are asset rich and cash poor. So what we'd like to see, and really what we should see, if the economic modelling is correct, is a clear move towards more diversification businesses. And Alex pointed out that he said there was 66% of farmers in, I think it was 2021, had decided to diversify. That's actually quite a high number, but I think certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, and by 2030, some 75% will have ventured into diversification. Next slide, please. So if we look at the actual concept, areas that you need to know about, business planning, making sure that there is a business plan that is robust and resilient. And I think again, let me stress that most businesses do not have business plans. And that's where the failure happens, because the idea behind the business model isn't built on a solid foundation. It's more built on sand, and it tends to fall. It's knowing the market, knowing exactly what what the market is you're actually going into. Funding and capital, and Alex has made clear, no diversification project can ever work without sufficient and available funding. There are going to be tax implications. The question I put here is, should the diversification be treated separately and away from the main business? We've already touched upon planning obligations. The vast majority of projects will require planning permission, which is likely to be the biggest issue. But also, what's the impact of the diversification on locality, on the local economy and on the local community? What does it look like and how do you engage? So let's look at a little more at the detail. Next slide, please. So the idea, can it work? Will it work? So you want to diversify, you need to understand what you want to diversify into and have a clear plan in moving forward. As I said, you need to establish a potential marketplace. If you're thinking about tourism diversification, for example, is there an adequate market that will deliver the right margins? Are you the only business in the area, or are you operating in a honeypot, as we say in tourism circles? As part of the idea, cash projections are vital. Is the new business going to be sustainable in the short term and medium term? Is the primary business able to support the diversification in that short term period when it probably will need support? And how long will the diversification itself be self-sufficient? How long would it take to be self-sufficient? A diversification has to be viable, but it's actually up to the owner, the person who creates the diversification, to actually establish what that viability means. Are you seeking diversification as a means of the main profit center away from the primary business? And of course, think outside the box. The original idea may be absolutely fantastic and it may work, but it's vital that all projects build in necessary flexibility. So what you need to do is think laterally, and you need to advise those who are seeking to diversify to think laterally. Next slide, please. If we look at information requirements, what do you actually need to find out? First of all, you need to know the market, so you need to do your research. How large is the diversification going to be? Is it too large? And importantly, is it manageable? And again, Alex touched on this in terms of labour needs. Essentially, are you able to cope running two businesses at the same time? Looking at forecast sales and cash flow. But you need to look at those not just in the short term, but in the medium and long term, because that will give you an idea as to whether the project is viable. Once it's up and running, can you add to the project and secure additional revenue? Is there a value added aspect in the short and medium term, and how can you actually build onto this? And I think it's important to remember that with diversification, everything is actually possible. Next slide, please. So if we turn to assets and ownership, as I said at the start, again, repeating the mantra, you're likely to be asset rich but cash poor. So what's the actual value of the asset? You need to create an asset register that will value each asset on its own. Buildings, how many are there on the farm? How are they used? What is the actual value? How much land do you have? Again, what is the value? How is the land used? And what do you actually need that land for? Can you use this as a basis of a business plan? Location, again, is very important. And how does that relate to the proposed project? And we're not just talking about fixed assets here. We're talking about the tangible assets as well. And for example, everybody here has a clear asset in the skills that they possess. So again, it's an asset, it needs to be recorded. And it's important as it provides those who finance a project a greater understanding of those who are running the project. Next slide, please. If we turn quickly to tax and diversification, we'll look at some of the implications. The business structure. Do you want the business profits to be taxed as a self-employed farmer, which means income tax, or as a separate company corporation tax? We've got issues of VAT. I think it's important to remember there are different rates of VAT depending on the types of trade, different rates for goods sold from farm shops and cafes, and VAT and tourism activities. And we know that as of the beginning of April, VAT and tourism is now set at the default 20% rate. But you may also wish to be VAT exempt if you believe that the diversification will not generate above the set threshold of £85,000. Again, this needs to be considered. When we look at capital gains tax, you need to work out how much you pay capital gains tax and whether you actually do pay CGT on sales of land to raise capital for the diversification project. And I'll be talking about funding in a minute. And of course, inheritance tax. I think it's important that you make sure that you're able to use the reliefs available. And of course, one of the biggest tax advantages of farming is that upon death, qualifying assets get 100% relief from inheritance tax through agricultural property relief. But remember, the reliefs are going to be different depending on the actual structures that you have. If we turn to the next slide, please, the business issues. So I've raised a number of issues that need to be taken into account. There are other business issues that also need to be considered. If we take business rates to begin with, it's important to recognize that you need to register and apply business rates, which are the non-domestic rates. Reliefs are available, but you also need to understand how the rules work. And again, taking tourism as an example, changes are taking place in the next 12 months for self-catering accommodation, which will actually change the base on how business rates will be applied in the future. Insurance, you need to consider what types of insurance are required, the levels of premium that you can afford to pay and that you need to actually pay, and importantly, the potential get-out clauses that insurance companies have. Always read the small print, because as we've seen with the COVID pandemic, what you may think qualifies under insurance may not actually be what your insurance company thinks you qualify for under insurance. Given the current situation we're in, we're a cost of living crisis, one could say, utilities and the costs are going to be important, and it's vital that a diversification project takes into account all costs, particularly those with energy, and factor this into the business model. Now, COVID has shown the importance of having in place clear resilience plans in the event of a pandemic. Now, hopefully, we won't have another COVID pandemic, certainly in our lifetime, and hopefully never again. But it's possible. And what's necessary is that you actually guard against the potential impacts, negative impacts of a pandemic. So it's important that the business itself shows it can protect public health as well as employee safety, because by doing that, you're promoting confidence. And by promoting confidence, you're leading to repeat business. And finally, what's the impact on the existing business? How do you balance the new interests of your diversification project with the demands of the existing business? And it's important to get this balance right, because if there is an imbalance, too much adverse pressure or negative pressure is placed on either business. And by doing that, one of the businesses will actually not work, will actually no longer cease to trade. If we turn to funding arrangements, and the next slide, please, Greg. This is now very, very important, because the rules have changed with regard to how the public sector funds diversification. In the past, we've had rural development, and we've had in England, the Rural Development Programme for England. That's now changed because we're no longer part of the European Union. Certainly for this year, for this financial year 2022 to 23, there are no funding grants or no capital grants available. But there will be capital grants available from 23, 24 and onwards. And we're actually discussing and pushing government to actually get the details out as quickly as possible. If there are no public sector capital grants, it's important then that a diversification project, a diversification idea actually is able to generate capital from the private sector. And what we're trying to do at the moment is actually work with the main lenders, the main retail banks and other lenders to actually put together a package so that diversification projects are able to use the capital which will become available for the next few years going forward. But it is important for those who are actually seeking to borrow to understand how the market works. And what we need to do, certainly as far as the CLA is concerned, is to ensure that there is an effective dialogue between borrower and lender. What we've seen too often in the past is that if there's very little engagement, then in the future, if the business is under pressure, there is a growing tendency for lenders to actually seek to default on the actual loans that are granted. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Greg. Well, Greg has left the building. Oh no, there is. He's back. He's back in the building. So let's look at some of the challenges involved. And of course, there are bound to be challenges for any diversification, but there are important ones to consider. I think the main one is, of course, available resource and cash flow. Any business requires these and uses the experience from the current business operation to learn from any mistakes. But as I said before, it's also very important to have an up-to-date and flexible, as well as resilient, business plan. And as I said, too few businesses actually have viable and effective business plans. But this is vital for the success of the diversification. If we look at labour needs, and Alex touched on this earlier, this needs to be dependent on the nature and the actual type of the diversification. But it's very likely that additional labour will be required. It could be part-time, could be full-time. But the question that everybody needs to consider is how that labour is actually sourced, taking obviously into account the changes to the immigration system put out by the present government and the actual supply of available labour, because that and wage costs will have a major impact on margins for the diversification. And of course, skills are very, very important. You've got to make sure that any labour you employ have the skills to do the job. It may be the case that you need to retrain those people to actually have those skills, but it may also be the case that you need to be retrained and upskilled. And finally, let's have a look very quickly at supply chains, because this is clearly flavour of the month, because the current economic situation highlights the importance of controlling costs and the availability of necessary stock. Any diversification project has to take these into account within the business plan, both, again, in the short, medium, and long term. Next slide, please. So quickly turning to planning. Now, planning, as I said, is probably likely to be one of the biggest issues that a diversification project will need to deal with. You need to establish from the very beginning whether full planning permission is required, or whether actually a project can start through the use of permitted development rights, which obviously are far simpler and far less complex. It's vitally important that any diversification project gets expert planning advice. The planning system is not only in a mess, it's also extremely complex. It's also important to do research on the history of the property, because it's very possible that there could be additional rules, could be protections, could be designations, which act as, in a sense, a constraint on the ability to get planning. Always discuss your proposals with a planning authority. And as I said before, have continued dialoguing and engagement. And it's that level of engagement which is crucial, because it's the best way to avoid conflict. And what you don't want to have, certainly as you go through the planning process towards the diversification project, is conflict. And also, finally, submit the planning application, making sure that the planning advisor is kept up to date with progress. And it's vitally important that you obtain professional advice before taking any action. So we come to the final two slides: local community and economy. Next slide, please, Greg. So if we look at this, not only is it important to engage with the planning authority, it's also vitally important to engage with the local community, because once you've got them on board with your diversification project, it makes life a lot easier. And it's important to discuss with those in the local community how important you believe that your diversification is to the local economy. Obviously, you don't need to downgrade your project. Always accentuate the positives and ensure that you're able to answer any questions that are actually asked. And you could say, in a sense, the diversification, if it's done properly, needs to be seen and should actually be a positive to the local community and economy. It should help everybody involved, the community, the economy, and the environment. And just remember, there are always going to be checks and balances in the process towards any diversification project. Final slide, please, Greg. So, very quick summary. We know that agricultural policy is changing, and there's going to be a greater momentum, greater attention paid towards diversification. So we know that 66% of farms at the moment, we believe that it's likely to be 75% in the future. You've got to make the most of the asset base that you have available and understand the issues that are involved in this. Any diversification is likely to be challenging, but it's also likely to be rewarding. It can be fun. It depends on the type of diversification you have. And I would suggest that the majority of diversifications are actually profitable, but it's important to get advice in terms of both tax and planning issues, and making sure that the diversification project itself is costed and is affordable, and that you have access to the necessary capital that you need to move forward. Always engage with the local community and ensure that the diversification is both sustainable and profitable. And by following simple steps and taking a structured approach to this, diversification, as I said, is not only going to be fun, it will be profitable in the short, medium to long term. Greg, thank you very much. Greg, I think you're on mute.
Thanks very much. You'd have thought after this long of time I'd have got used to that, wouldn't I? But it'd be great now to just, I was just saying thanks, Charles, basically. And I'll now going to pass over to Elsa, who's going to do a short presentation now just about her experiences as a sheep farmer and her diversification projects, if that's okay.
I think I'm going to share some slides, hopefully, at some point. Is that working?
Yep, that's working for me. That's great.
Brilliant.
At the bottom, just press hide at the bottom, and then that'll clear that away. Yeah, you're away. Perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm Elsa. I'm from a farm down on the most southerly point of mainland Britain, Tregullus Farm. We are, as you can see from the picture, surrounded by the sea on about 3 sides. We have a lot of public access, footpaths, with well over 250,000 people on the land a year. It's much more than that after COVID. We're part of the Lizard National Nature Reserve, as well as Triple SI area, and we are the first place in Cornwall that the chough, which is the bird of Cornwall, came back to. So it's a really special place. We have 248 acres of mixed beef and sheep with a little bit of arable, 280 sheep that we put to Clin Tups, and 40 Hereford Cross suckler cows, with another 16 Dexters that we use for our conservation grazing ground. On top of that, we have a farm shop We run an events business, and we do a lot of school visits through our HLS scheme, which is now moving on to the higher tier, the new higher tier stewardship. It's a very difficult place to farm because of the people. There's a few pictures of what we get up to, some of the animals, yeah, so we are a family farm. My mum and dad, Rona and Neville, they met at Harper Adams, but neither of them are from farms. And they took their first tenancy on Exmoor when I was about 6 months old in 1999. Along with me, that I've got four younger siblings, so there's 5 of us in total. And we first started looking at diversification in 2001, as a lot of people did, post foot and mouth. We started selling a few sheep and lamb boxes, and we started also selling geese for Christmas, and then ducks for Easter. And it all started very small, a few bits and pieces here and there that people that we were friends with would buy. We sent some off to family. But within 2 years, we supplied Dutch originals and further diversified into building a poultry abattoir. We then moved farms and continued to diversify. And when I was about 9 or 10, I started to sell duck eggs, and won the Country Living Food and Farming Awards. When we moved down to the Lizard, when the tenancy on Dartmoor ended in 2013, we saw that there was so much more opportunity to connect with the public and to sell our products. It's a very tourist business area, and we had the opportunity to connect with more people, both locals and visitors, and we suddenly had a lifestyle that was very, very enviable to many people, and we'd like to share that. So it's really been absolutely vital the whole time, that from when my parents started in farming, that we've been able to add value, whether that's doing pedigree or selling organically. We always had that large rent to pay with being tenants and being new entrants. So we'd always had the mindset that we needed to add to what we produced. When we came to the Lizard, this became even more important because the farm is so difficult to farm in what would be considered a normal way, because of the number of people using the land. Our biggest cause of death in our sheep flock is from dog attacks, while in the summer it's absolutely impossible to even move a tractor down the road, going to check the stock unless you're doing it at 6 o'clock in the morning can be a half an hour job to get the 1/4 of a mile from here to the most southerly point. So it's very important that we have to put up with this, so we get something back from it. So we realized very quickly that we had a lot of visitors, a lot of foodie locals, and we're on the Lizard Point. It's 10 miles to the nearest supermarket. So that gave us the opportunity to sell our products in the local community, with a community that already had a mindset of buying locally, which has given us, made it a lot easier to get started. We also saw it as an opportunity to educate about our farm. The National Trust has sometimes has a bit of a bad rep in Cornwall. We're a National Trust tenant. So we took on the farm knowing that there was people locally that didn't want us there, or had a lot of opinions on the way the farm was farmed, whether it be from an environmental perspective or just from a perspective of them wanting to see the farm continue like they've always known it to, and a sentimentality and a love for the area that they don't want to see changed. So we knew that was part of our barrier, and also the opportunity within the farm. Initially, the extra money was to supplement the farm to keep it going, but Brexit came along, the loss of BPS, of different stewardship schemes, and our stewardship schemes would be coming to the end anyway. We were very aware that we had to do something more to keep it going. So this is what we do. We have a tea rooms where we sell locally produced, homemade food. We always say that the profit margin on a cup of tea is much better than on a sheep, because you've got that £1.50 in your hand as the customer walks out the door. We do a lot of cream teas in the summer, and it's primarily a tourist business, so that we are doing that from Easter to September, October. We also do a lot of school visits. Lambing school visits are the best. People love them. It's a real highlight of the children's year. The 2 weeks before Easter, we had over 200 children come on the farm. Not all at once, but we did have 60 something children come all in one day, which was quite stressful. We don't get a lot of money for this. We do it through our HLS scheme, but we do see it as a way of picking up customers as well, because each of these children, they go home, they tell their mum and dad, and they might come out for an ice cream once in the summer holidays, or they might come and buy a half lamb every single year, every 6 months. It can be as much or as little as they want, but they have that opportunity to come out onto the farm. It's great. It's a real feel-good thing for us as well. So it's really nice. We also expand that on to doing farming days. We're very involved in Open Farm Sunday. So we do a big Open Farm Sunday event that's always crazy, so I don't have any pictures of it. We also do lambing days where people come and they just want to hold a lamb, and they have an ice cream and a cup of tea afterwards. And it gets them on the farm and connecting with us as the farmer and farming in general. So then the sort of biggest part of our business is selling the lambs. We sell 100% of our lamb born on the farm through farmers markets and through the farm shop. We do a lot of half lamb boxes. I do 2 markets that are very different markets. One is in a more wealthy area of Cornwall, and they have a very different perspective and are buying for very different reasons than what my other farmers market, the more local one in the local town, Houston, is. And knowing your customer here is really, really important. I know exactly what things I'm going to sell at Flushing, the more wealthy farmers market. I know that they want mutton, and as they see it as a more sustainable meat. I know that they'll want whole legs because they do a lot of dinner parties. And I know at Houston Market, I sell a lot of liver, a lot of kidneys, because this is it's more comfort food. It's an older demographic, so it's really and it's a really great place to get to know people, meet people. There's some fantastic, really interesting people out there, and I really enjoy it. And I really enjoy connecting with other producers as well. Some of the people I've met at farmers markets, we sell their products in the farm shop, and they sell or use our meat in the things they're making. So that's a really good, it's really enjoyable, really good fun. We also have obviously the farm shop, and we've recently taken on the newspapers for the village. So it's no longer just a farm shop, a seasonal business. It's also a really great community shop. I have fascinating conversations with people that live locally, and it's a really important asset to the village. The older people coming down, we have a lot of people in the village that, like many villages, I think, that have dementia, and go in and walk into the shop and getting their newspaper is the one thing that they can do for themselves still. And then we have the events business. So we do weddings. That's been sort of put a stop to by COVID, but they've rebooked. We have a great outdoor space with the 1850s courtyard, farm courtyard. We've managed to, because we're good at going with it and sort of thinking on the fly all the time. We've done some really great events that are within COVID rules and have been very safe for the community. The picture here is just one of a jazz picnic that we did, that you bought your own food, all socially distanced, while music was playing, and it was a really great community opportunity for the community to get together. Through it all, it's all about the farm. It's not about the other things that are going on. The really strong thing all the way through is about the farm, and it's about what we're doing on the farm, and how it all fits around the farm. The people are very surprised when they say, "Oh, is it a working farm?" And you go, "Yeah, of course it's a working farm. This is a farm shop. It's a shop on a farm." And that's the most important thing for us, is that we're everything comes not second to the farm, but everything fits around the farm and fits with the farm before anything else. So that's a bit how we make it work. We have the lifestyle, we have everything that people connect with, the countryside, the family, all working together. Something about our lifestyle and our business resonates with every single customer, from 96-year-old that comes and gets her paper, who was a land girl during the war, to the 20-something, 30-something yummy mummies that would love to raise their children in the countryside on a small holding. And they love that story, being able to, people are more willing to spend money when they have a story to go with it, because it's not just a leg of lamb on the table, it's a leg of lamb from the most southerly point. And when you go down there, you can see the lambs running up and down the road. And look at this picture we took last summer when we took our grandchildren down there. There's a story behind everything, and people love a story to tell. Particularly, it's been, I'm sure everyone's seen it with things like Clarkson's Farm, all those This Week on the Farm, all those farm countryside programs that people are loving at the moment. We've always listened to our customers. They know what they want, and if we don't provide that, then they're not going to be very loyal to us, and it's not going to help us grow as a business. So understanding what they want, when they say, I want a spatchcock chicken, when we did ducks and chickens, instead of saying, well, who on earth would want that? That's a really weird thing to have. We looked it up we Googled it and printed out instructions and learned how to spatchcock a chicken. It's not on the mentality that the customer's always right, but the customer is the one that you're selling to. You need to being able to connect with them and understand their perspective has been really important, and is being really important for customer loyalty for us. Next one. So when you're diversifying, the most important things to consider is having the right product. It's no good having a product that is not what the customer wants. It's not a quality product. We spent many years getting a really nice tasting lamb, and in the market, they might, when you take them to the livestock market, they may not get the highest price. They may not be the perfect thing that you're looking a abattoir is looking for, or the supermarket. But if you're not selling to those people, then it doesn't matter. You've got to have the product, even if it's a holiday cottage. If you have having the right product before you even start, having it perfect, well, not perfect, but is really important. Being genuine, understanding yourself, your business, and being genuine about what goes on, why you're there, and that comes as telling your story. Everybody is fascinated by farming, and farmers, and they want to genuinely want to know more. So genuinely telling your story, and it doesn't have to be the gory details, but if you're not the big swish, fancy London, I don't know, holiday cottage, selling yourself to those people, you don't have to be that. You can be, we've got no Wi-Fi, we've got limited phone signal, because there's a customer for that, and and if you're genuine about it and say, well, this is a holiday you can come on and you can switch off and you don't have to look at your phone, is as valuable as having the whole all singing, all dancing experience. And being able to tell that story in a genuine way is really important. However, you do have to know your customer. You do have to understand their perspective and where they're coming from, and make things easier for them. Sort of a classic story we tell is somebody we know was selling pork boxes, and they sold one to a friend that was a single man on his own, and they bagged up 40 sausages all in one bag to go in the freezer, which is not how not a good thing for somebody on their own. So knowing your customer, bagging sausages in 2s or 4s, a usable quantity, or selling half legs of lamb rather than full legs of lamb to people that have got small ovens is really important. And the most important thing is all these things, they take time. It's not a quick fix to business problems. It's not oh my God, I've got a massive fertilizer bill coming, I better open a farm shop. They take time, they take consistency of product and of effort. It's really important to understand that we found it really important to understand that it's not going to happen instantly. And sometimes you sit in the farm shop for £30 days when it rains and nobody comes, and everyone goes to Truro or to the Seal Sanctuary or where there's a play barn for the kids. And you have to sit there for that £30. And then you get days when it's amazing and you can't keep up, and it makes it all worth it. You just have to live through those ups and downs, and it is very much an up and down business. Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Well, thanks very much, Elsa. That's been great to kind of hear from you and get your side of the story. And it's been, really interesting to see. My main takeaway point from kind of what you were saying was diversification isn't just about turning your business and making money. That's not kind of it. There's so many more benefits, and Alex kind of pointed some out as well, kind of utilizing some skills or going in some interest that you've always had that you haven't had the chance to, supporting the community, educating the next generation of people. Kind of there's benefits beyond just that financial side of it, which I think is great to hear. Now, I have got slightly dodgy internet, which keeps dropping in and out, so I'm not going to have an extensive Q&A session, but we have. So I'm just going to, if that's all right, if anyone's got any more questions, then please drop them on an email to me or anyone who spoke today, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to kind of answer those from you. But we have had one come in, and I think I might put this to Charles, if that's all right. And it says, successive governments have encouraged farmers to diversify, but is that increasingly being used to prop up agricultural production and maintain low food prices? So kind of how come farmers have to diversify? How come we can't kind of get the price for our food that farmers might think they probably deserve?
I think it's important to realise that the government, and it is the successive governments from the Second World War, have always put forward a policy of low food prices. That's what the general public wants. That's what the general public has voted for. And I would agree that certainly since 2001, you've got this big push from Labour government to begin with, and then the Conservative administration since 2010 have pushed diversification. I think it's important not to conflate the two issues. I think as Elsa has made very, very clear, diversification, if it's done properly, can actually support the farm. And I think Elsa's presentation was excellent on the point that it is all about the farm. It's the farm is the story. That's how you sell that to the general public. And the diversification projects that certainly her family are involved in are part of that. But for other types of diversification, I think one of the biggest problems that we've got, and looking at low food prices, is that in the current circumstances, what you would normally expect is that the supermarkets, the main supermarkets such as Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, whatever, would actually put their prices up. And they're not. Well, they're certainly not by the percentages that we would normally expect. And we know that there is a current price war going on between the discounters and Tesco's, Asda and Sainsbury's. Now, what that does is put further pressure on farmers. Now, farmers will not be able to cope in the future because they won't actually have the margins that they actually need. And that is a major concern as far as we're concerned. And what it means is that there needs to be a far better relationship between the farmers, the processors, the middle people, you could say, and the retailers through the supermarket ombudsman, through the code of practice and through the ombudsman as well. And the government needs to start listening to the industry, because without that engagement, without that dialogue, we're going to see farms actually go out of business, because they certainly will not be able to cope with the rising prices that we're seeing at the moment, because they won't be able to get the returns from the marketplace, which they should expect.
Thanks for that. My internet dropped out, so I actually missed half of that answer, but I'm sure it covered the question.
It was an excellent answer.
I'm sure. Good. So I'm sorry we're going to have to just cut this bit short on the Q&A, because my internet is being particularly temperamental tonight, and I'm just conscious it's going to cut out again. So I'd just like to take the chance to say thanks to Alex, Charles and Elsa. I think it's been a really interesting kind of discussion tonight. I can't wait to diversify my farm once I've got one. So there'll be a recording of this on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. So if there's anyone you know who you think might be interested, or you've got a farmer who's thinking of diversifying, who you think this might be helpful to watch back, just go onto the Basis YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch it back on there. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.